Hey, today I'm talking about three 1950s Audrey Hepburn films. And the names of those three movies are The Nun Story, Love in the Afternoon, and Green Mansions. Well, first up is The Nun Story. This is a 1959 film, and I was really worried going into it that it was just going to be Christian propaganda, specifically Catholic propaganda, that it was just going to be like, oh, isn't being a nun great? This is the best. But that's not what this movie is at all. I would almost describe it as it's giving a neutral view of what being a nun is like. Like, yeah, Audrey Hepburn's character is happy and excited to become a nun for reasons that are never verbally stated but are hinted at, which was totally the right choice. And it shows all of the training stuff and how shitty it is from more of a third-party perspective of like, we're just watching this stuff happening. We're not telling you how to think and feel about it. It's just like, look at this thing. This is what's happening. Have your own emotions about it, which was the correct choice. And they went in so many different directions that I wasn't expecting. For instance, she goes to Africa at one point, and there is a metric ton of black people, which I was not expecting for a 50s movie. And what I was extra not expecting was, for the most part, it was a positive portrayal of them. It's just them existing, just showing them doing regular, everyday, normal people stuff. That section was almost kind of filmed documentary-esque style. It didn't feel like they planned out those scenes. It was just kind of like they had a lot of these locals around and they just like placed the camera in front of them and just let them like play with the kids or breastfeed or just exist, like people just doing stuff. And it was so refreshing, especially from like a 1950s film. I loved it. That was great. What I loved too is that the movie is just about a very specific time period in this woman's life. And it's clear that there's so much story that happens prior to the start of the movie that, again, is just only hinted at. And there's so much story that takes place after the end of the movie, but we don't need to know that story. I definitely really enjoyed this movie and would totally recommend it. I would especially recommend it if you're Catholic or just have had lots of experiences with nuns. To the best of my knowledge, I've only had one experience with a nun, and she was pleasant enough. I'm not Catholic. But I think even as non-Catholics or even as non-Christian people, you can still easily enjoy this movie because I think there's lots of ideas within this movie that anyone can really latch onto. So yes, really good, definitely recommend. The next up is Love in the Afternoon. This is a 1957 movie, also starring Gary Cooper, directed by Billy Wilder. And the basic premise is Audrey plays this young woman whose father is a private eye who mostly does like, is my spouse cheating on me type investigations. And so one of those is happening and the husband's like, oh, I'm gonna kill the guy who's having sex with my wife. And Audrey's like, no! So she goes to help out that guy who's gonna get murdered and ends up falling in love with him because he's handsome and he sleeps around a lot. So I didn't care for this movie, but it's interesting because I think the premise is fine. I think that's a decent start to a rom-com. Audrey can play an adorable young woman. She is gorgeous in this movie. Her pigtail look I thought was ridiculous, but she's gorgeous. Okay, so there is a 28-year age difference between Audrey Hepburn, who was 28 in this movie, and Gary Cooper. So he was literally twice her age. And normally I hate that. That's very gross. Old school Hollywood really love to do it. They still do it in modern Hollywood. The reason I hate that is because there is an innate power dynamic issue between the two parties. But I think they tackled that question interestingly here in that Audrey's character is constantly messing with the older gentleman in a way that's basically like stealing his power away from him to more even things out. And that was such an interesting approach. They didn't really stick the landing, but I think that's an idea worth exploring. The main issue though with this movie is twofold. One, it's just straight up boring. It's so boring. Secondly, I think the cause of why it's boring is that Gary Cooper was not the correct choice for this role. He just had no chemistry with Audrey Hepburn and it wasn't fun or interesting to look at. I didn't really buy him as this big playboy guy gallivanting around the world doing whatever. He really just did not feel right. So I honestly, with a different male lead and a good ending, this movie movie could actually be something worthwhile. As is, though, it really does not work. And I should have known that going into it because it was a critical and financial bomb back in the 50s. So yay. Would I recommend it? No, it's not good. Though Audrey is really adorable in it. So if you just want to like fast forward through every scene where she's not in it, then sure, yeah, go for that. But don't legitimately watch it because it's not good. And lastly is Green Mansions. This is a 1959 film, also starring Anthony Perkins, who you know from Psycho. And the basic premise is Anthony plays this guy who really needs some money for like a revolution thing. And so he goes into the jungle to find gold. He comes across a village that he sort of befriends. I don't really know. And then after that, he finds a white woman who's been living in the wilderness for most of her life. This movie is incredibly boring. There's no chemistry between the leads again. And also, it's really offensive. There's just nothing to this movie. I looked at this movie and I was like, it's probably gonna be bad, but Audrey Hepburn will still be very beautiful in it. Plus, like, it'll be fun to see her in just like jungle attire. But like, she's wearing this dress onesie thing that has nothing to it and it's skin colored. I don't really get what they were going for with it. It just looked weird. Didn't look like normal jungle stuff. Also, she had like bangs and her hair was always perfectly combed, which just felt so weird that like, oh, I live in the wilderness and I love nature a lot. That's a big part of her character. She's very nature. But at all times, my hair must never have even a single strand out of place. And it's like, that's just so dumb. It's just so dumb. And then Anthony Perkins was also clean shaven the entire time he was in the wilderness, even though he was like unconscious for several days at one point. I know it's a little thing, but it's just like, it bothered me. Also, the portrayal of non-white people was weird. I don't think it was the best subject matter to begin with, so I think they kind of set themselves up for failure. I don't think there was a way this story could have been told well. But yeah, no, it just really doesn't work. It is fun to see Audrey with a bunch of wild animals. Like, she has some deer that are cute. That's kind of the only redeeming thing about this movie. Otherwise, it's not good. So yeah, no, didn't like it, don't recommend it. Alrighty, now for today's rankings. First up, we got The Nun Story, sitting at number 25 in the really like section. That's really high up. And then after that is Love in the Afternoon, sitting at number 177 in the didn't like category. And then bringing up the rear, rightfully so, and right behind is Green Mansion, sitting at number 179, also in the didn't like category. And this is a total of 189 old movies so far this year.